Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Family Treehouse, a podcast series brought to you by Storied, where I chat with people that have a passion for genealogy, storytelling, or both. I'm your host, Heather Haunert, and I'm really excited today to chat with somebody that's not our usual guest. Today, I have Diahan Southard, founder and CEO of Your DNA Guide. She has over 20 years of experience as a genetic genealogy expert and educator. I am really excited to have this chat with you today. Welcome, Diahan.
Thanks, Heather. I am passionate about storytelling and genealogy, so I think we're all in the right place.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, especially with having a little bit of a DNA spin today. I'm looking forward to that. So, Diane, why don't you just start by telling our audience a bit about your background and how you got started in family history and DNA in particular?
Yeah, so I am an accidental entrepreneur. I never intended to run a business. I was not the girl with the lemonade stand on the corner, was not me. I might have been the worker. You tell me what to do, and I can do a really good job at it, but it was never my intention to get here. It sort of just happened to me in a way, and I trace it back to my high school English teacher. He told all of us graduating seniors that the best thing we could do for our career is as soon as we got to college, we should find a professor who was researching something we were interested in and get involved.
Love
And
that.
so I give that advice to every graduating senior that's
Yeah.
planning on going to college because it literally changed my life.
Yeah.
So I was interested in DNA. I was interested in genetics. Things like that definitely were my bend. And so I walked onto campus at Brigham Young University, and they didn't have a genetics department at that
Mhm.
time. So I went to the microbiology department. I
Okay.
asked the secretary there for a list of things that professors were researching, and she handed it over. And I looked down the list, and it's like bacteriology, virology. And I was like, boring, boring. And then there was a professor, Dr. Scott Woodward, researching what was labeled as archaeogenetics.
Hmm.
And it turned out to be the study of the DNA of ancient Egyptian mummies.
Very cool.
Yeah. So I was like, yeah, I'll do that. Sign me up. So I walked down the hall. His office was like 5 doors down from the office, knocked on his door. He was there. And I said, hey, I'd love to volunteer in your lab. And, free work is free work. So he was like, okay. And so at that time, we were trying to identify some mummies that were buried in a cemetery outside of Cairo. It was about 60 miles outside of Cairo, and there was no town. Like there were hundreds of burials, and no one knew who these people were.
Wow.
So it was a multidisciplinary study. There were textiles, there were, religious artifacts, like all kinds of things were being studied, and we were trying to piece together DNA. And so really what it came down to is Dr. Woodward, we could get into the burial site, we could extract DNA from bone and things like that, but really there was nobody to compare them to. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, you could find out, what their DNA was, but you couldn't know who they were because there was no one to compare them to. And so Dr. Woodward really started promoting this idea of creating a database.
Yeah.
And that turned into the Sorensen Molecular Genealogy Foundation, which was the first genetic genealogy endeavor ever.
Yeah.
And I just got swept up along with it. So my love of family history came second. It came after I realized the power of DNA in connecting our families together, and then, solidified as I began to understand the connection that we have to our past and how it influences who we are, how we see ourselves today.
That that is an incredible story. So were you like actually did you actually get to go on site in Egypt?
Oh, I was so close. So we
Ah,
had a research trip planned, and
yeah.
I was going to take the semester off, like to go for a month into
Yeah.
Egypt and all this. But there's all this paperwork and
Yeah.
all the that had to be, anyway, it just never came through, and we were so heartbroken, just
Yeah.
crushed, disappointed. But you know how things just always work out? It really was that semester of Scott, so Dr. Woodward being like in country instead of off excavating,
Yeah.
that the foundation really took root. And
Yeah.
so, you know, everything happens for a reason, but I am still, yeah, that is one of my biggest regrets.
Yeah. Oh, that just incredible story. I'm so glad you shared it with us. That is amazing. So you have a book too, and I want to talk about this. We talked a little bit off camera that I just one thing in your book that you highlight right at the very beginning when people are starting to get into DNA, because I do think DNA is where people, people that really don't know anything about family history, that is what they jump to, and get into that. And there's a line in there you talk about how if going down that path, once you go down that path of DNA, you say once you know you can't unknow. And I just think that that is such a powerful piece of information, and how powerful DNA is and making those decisions. So I appreciate that part of your book. Tell us, how did the book come about? What made you want to do that?
So, I was lecturing, on the circuit, on the genealogy lecture circuit, for years. And I love it. I love educating. There's nothing better for me to do than stand up and talk to people about something I love. I really enjoy teaching. And so people would ask all the time, when are you going to write a book? When are you going to write a book? And I was like, never. I'm never writing a book because this industry changes so fast.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
as soon as you write a book, it's going to be outdated. And
Right.
so it just held no appeal to me at all. I again never wanted to be an entrepreneur, never wanted to be an author. Just, I want to be a speaker, and I was. So it was fine.
Yeah.
But really what it came down to was, as part of your DNA guide, we were offering one-on-one coaching calls. And
Yeah.
so I would meet with people online and we would run over their DNA test results and they would tell me their goal and I would help them walk through everything. And what I realized, that even though every situation is unique, everybody has a different ancestral past, everybody has different DNA matches, the process was the same.
Yeah.
It was really, so that's when it really started to solidify that there is a process that you can follow no matter who you are, no matter your situation, no matter your DNA matches, there's a process.
Yeah.
And that's when writing a book became appealing, because I thought if I could write this process down and teach people how to just run through the process, then they could be successful. So as I began that, I realized that, well, yes, there is a process, but it is dependent on what you have in front of you. And so instead
Yeah.
of writing like a read cover to cover kind of book, I
Yes.
wrote a book that's you and me together walking through your personal experience. Because
Yes.
even though you're different, there are still a limited number of options. And because I've worked with so many people and seen so many different sets of data, I felt like I could really identify what are the options.
Yeah.
And I could help you see which path you needed to be on as opposed to someone else. And I could guide you in that direction.
I love that. It makes me, when I picked it up the first time, it's like that choose your own adventure that I used to read from, the early 80s. And that's what it made me think of, because you're really kind of picking what works for you. And I also love that, I think DNA can be so daunting for people, and you do not make it that way at all. I think your book is super, reader friendly, user friendly, and you do feel like you're just with Diane along for the
Good.
walk in the book.
I'm
So
so glad to hear that. Thank you. Yeah,
yeah.
you can say choose your own adventure. I can't, as that is copyrighted. So you describe it that way all you want, because that is what it is, but I can't technically say that anywhere. So
Okay. Well, Diane, let's talk a little bit about storytelling, and you can definitely weave in the DNA part of it. Why do you think storytelling is such an important part of family history?
what I love most about storytelling and how it mirrors DNA so perfectly is that storytelling is completely unique to you, just like your DNA is. You genetically are the only one of you who has ever lived and who will ever live. And your story is just as unique. That's the cool thing about stories, is that you and I can go through the exact same experience.
Yeah.
We can spend the entire day together doing exactly the same things, even eating exactly the same food. And at the end, your story is different than mine.
Yeah,
And I
absolutely.
love that about stories. And it is exactly the same as DNA.
Yeah. How great way to describe that. I think you're so right. Everyone's is unique, and just write it, get
Yes.
started and write those stories. How do you go about, or how do you talk to people about incorporating the DNA part of it into their stories?
So I think one of the most important things to think about when incorporating DNA into your story is that for some reason, DNA has received this reputation of always being right.
Mhm.
People say DNA doesn't lie and things like that. And yes, it's true in a way. DNA is a unique kind of record that does connect and link us in a unique way. But I hesitate when people make those kinds of statements and try to incorporate that into their story as if it is this final law about what happened, because it's easy to misinterpret.
Yeah.
The thing about DNA relationships is that the same amount of DNA that you share with someone, we measure that in what we call a centimorgan. So
Mhm.
you share, let's say, 72 centimorgans with someone. That represents a myriad of relationships. There isn't
Right.
one relationship for every centimorgan amount. And
Yeah.
yet people often think of it as that kind of clear-cut answer to a
Hmm.
relationship, and it really isn't.
Yeah.
Another thing that I feel like people do with DNA is when they discover a relationship with DNA that's unknown to them, especially if it's a relatively close relationship in their immediate family or even in their grandparent generation, I feel like they tend to favor the genetic connection over the familial connection. And it's like they cut out of their story all of this history, memory, experience that they've had for all of these years that's really created them and made them who they are. And suddenly it's like it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter because
Yeah.
this genetic piece has come in. And I think that's unfair.
Mhm. Yeah, and one thing that jumped out at me too when I was just thinking of that, looking at the book, I thought about how, talking, it's not, I don't want to say it's not always right, but looking at it from a different perspective, there was one section you had in there about double first cousins,
Mm.
and how, like, that immediately made me think of my mom is a double first cousin with another lady that she looks more like my mom than my mom's siblings. Like, it's incredible. And I haven't done her DNA. My mom's I have, but not her. And so I think it's important, to look at those kinds of things too, and not just jump to quick conclusions. So
Right. I think you've just said it. Like people tend somehow with DNA to just jump to these quick conclusions
yeah.
and they fill in
Yes.
all of this story that
Yes.
isn't actually true or factual in any way. I'm
Yeah.
like, some people will make a discovery and then they automatically assume it's their own grandfather who, you know, was stepping outside of his marriage when
Yeah.
actually it could have been either way. Like your family isn't always the one that has the incorrect genealogy, right? Or
Right.
it's funny how people just automatically like fill in the story when
Right.
there really hasn't been any evidence of their story at all. And so
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. Good call. Tell us about, I love, this is one of my favorite parts. I love to talk about, memorable experiences that you've had when you've done research, or a favorite family story you have that surrounds DNA. So what's one of yours?
Yeah, well, of course, my favorite story is my own because everybody loves their own stories.
They do.
Um, so my mom was adopted and she always knew that she was adopted. It was never a mystery. And she actually didn't have that much curiosity surrounding her biological family.
Mhm.
She was raised as an only child of her parents who couldn't have children, and they worshiped her. They
Yeah.
spoiled
Yeah.
her. They gave her everything. Such fabulous people, my grandparents. And so she just never felt like she needed anything else.
Yeah.
And I think a large part of it was I think she felt like her curiosity would be a betrayal of of the
Yes,
family that
yes.
she had.
Yeah,
And so she just didn't entertain it.
yeah,
And then,
yeah.
I go off to college, I start down this path, and my mom being incredibly supportive always of everything I did, she was all in. She's like, okay, what should we do? And so, as part of that early Sorensen Foundation work, we were collecting DNA samples from people along with their 4-generation family trees so that we
Yeah.
could create those correlations between family trees and genetics. Of course, my
Yes.
mom didn't have a biological family tree, but she was visiting and I was doing lab stuff and she was like, well, I want to do lab stuff. And so we have a picture of me, I drew blood out of her arm because we were drawing blood at that time. Like,
Yes.
I'm not
Yes.
a phlebotomist. That's how trusting my mom was. She's like, sure, I'm sure you can do it. You've watched it a million times. So I did. I drew her blood and we extracted her DNA right there in the lab together. And then it just became part of the database. It was just like part of everybody else's, which went through all of these iterations. And anyway, eventually we ended up, having her tested at other companies and things like that. And then the pieces just started to fall into place and we were able to find her biological family. And it was an incredible experience. And um, we ended up going to a family reunion that was organized by her
Oh,
mom's side of the family just for us.
yeah.
And these are huge families, 13 kids of 13 kids kind
Yes.
of
Yes.
families. And it was a little overwhelming because we're a very small family.
Yes.
But on the way home from that event, she said, I just feel so full.
Aw.
And I think the whole journey really helped fill a hole she didn't even know she had.
Yeah.
She
Yeah.
just spent her whole life being so just focused on being happy with where she was that she didn't want for anything or she didn't think that she did. But having those people that were her biological people around her and so
Yeah.
supporting and loving of her, it really, I think, healed some, dark
Yeah.
wound that she had. It was really beautiful.
Yeah. I can see that. That is great. That's a great story. Thank you for sharing that. Diane, as we wrap up here, what would you say? Do you have any tips, tricks, or pieces of advice or wisdom for our audience that you want to leave with us? It can be about anything. It can be DNA specific, it can be family history. What would you tell them?
I think the number one thing that I like to tell people is that DNA is hard. There are things that you have to learn that you've never learned before, but it's so worth it because it is such a unique record. You are literally the only one of you. And if you do not document your DNA record, it will be lost forever. And the compounding effect of so many of us recording our DNA in this way, it creates a lattice that creates records, that creates connections that cannot be created in any other way. And I think even if you feel like you know your family history, you don't have any lurking mysteries or anything like that, it is still a record and a document that helps solidify those connections. And really importantly, it helps bring in other people. Like, if you know your family history, fantastic for you, but guaranteed there are members of your family, descendants of your ancestors who don't have that benefit. And DNA is one of the easiest and best ways for you to bring them in, gather them back into your family. And so getting your own record out there is so important. And it's it's like any other thing that's worth learning. It takes time, but you can do it. That's my line. You can do the DNA and I can help you. So if you
Yeah.
need extra resources, of course, we've talked a lot about the book today, but we have a blog that has a lot of free resources on it. We have a YouTube channel. So if this is something that you're feeling that little niggling about, yeah, I really should learn this stuff, I am your girl. I can help you.
Yes. You are definitely their girl for sure. Well, I cannot thank you enough for spending time with me this morning. Your expertise and passion for the topic just shines through. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Heather. It's been a pleasure.
Well, until next time, friends, embrace the power of your family's untold tales and embark on a journey of discovery. Let the ink flow and the words dance as you weave together the threads of your ancestors' lives. Start writing your family stories today and let their voices echo through the generations to come at storied.com. Have a great day, everyone. And that brings us to the end of this episode of the Family Treehouse, where we celebrate the power of storytelling and preserving our family legacies. Storied is more than just a platform for sharing stories. Dive into those historical records and newspapers, discovering the hidden gems that bring your ancestors to life. Add branches to your family tree, connecting the dots between generations. Thank you for joining us on this storytelling journey. Your stories matter, and through Storied, they have the power to resonate across time and touch the hearts of generations to come. Keep uncovering your family's history and keep the spirit of storytelling alive with Storied.